Hello, guys. Thanks for joining me. Sorry for the long pause. If you're still watching this, I want to talk to you about something. You guys ever made coffee? Take water, put coffee grounds in a container, and you put that coffee through the water. The, the water through the coffee grounds, and it becomes coffee. It doesn't taste like water anymore. Thinking about it, I believe that is what's happened to the Christian church. And the grounds is our traditions. We can no longer see what the Bible looks like apart from. It's hard to separate the water from the coffee once you made coffee. Just talking with a friend about one thing, the first century perspective. Just first of all, we view everything in the New Testament almost like it stands alone without looking at other things. So the Bible, a majority of the Bible was written around the first century AD. The everybody except for Luke and Acts was a certified Hebrew or Jew. Now I know that the term Jew actually refers to the two tribes of Israel, not the whole of the 12 tribes. But that's the term when we talk about the Hebrews. It all becomes Jews. That's another thing that has been changed by the grounds. So when we think about what a first century perspective would look like, you'd have to look at things from the perspective of someone who was raised in the Hebrew Jewish culture, and their definitions of things. They're writing to other fellow Jews. So their definitions, when they're speaking, are the definitions that their readers would understand. So if we talk about, let's say, the term worship, which I've done a video on, when they're using that term, they're using that term in a way that their audience, the Hebrews or the Jews, would understand. Not what we understand today. The thing is that so many core concepts of Christianity are not what they used to be. Not what, and the thing is, if we're able to look at the Bible from a first century perspective, we'll come away with totally different theology, as different as coffee is from water. So talk about monotheism for a second. How did the Jews, which Jesus was a Jew, and his followers, which were Jews, how would they have understood monotheism? What that would have looked like. The habit of taking Yah and incorporating it into their names. Part of the Jewish culture or Hebrew culture. That doesn't mean they all claim to be God. It just they wanted to be associated with their God. Which is not Elohim is the, I don't know why I'm mentioning that. Elohim, like in, probably because I have Ecclesiastes fixation, is the generic term for deity. So I wasn't talking about the Hebrew God in that book. We look at ideas like, we use the word, in Christianity, we use the word scripture, right? Well, in order to understand that word, we have to understand what it would have meant to the people who wrote the words. So that means we would need an understanding of what first century, not later, first century Jewish idea of canon would be. To understand what the word scripture means, we'd need to understand that. So we'd have to get rid of the coffee and go back to the water. We use the word church. I've discussed in a previous video that, and most Orthodox Christians will agree with this until I start drawing down on it. They say the church is the people, the church is not the building. Everybody agrees with that. But the idea of ecclesia would have been the gatherings and not organizations. When Paul preaches against separatism in First Corinthians, Christians take that and they just go, no use to us. We got 30 different churches. Choose our churches. As if each gathering of people is its own separate entity. So what would the Hebrews or Jews, what would they have understood their ecclesia to mean? A lot of people go and they discuss elders and deacons and all these things that we in American Christianity understand to be leadership roles. And we understand those to be part of the organizational structure of Christianity. We have the lay people, the pastors, elders, then Jesus, then God. I've talked about how the organizational structure in Christianity, according to the Bible, is we are all brothers. It's vertical as opposed to pyramidal. There is one mediator between God and man. That's not your pastor. It's not your elder. It's not set up in tiers. Jesus said in Matthew, I usually say it's 24. It's Matthew 23, actually. Matthew 23, we're all brothers. He talks about how you should not put one person above another because we all have the same relationship and that's to the Christ and to God. In Revelation, Jesus says he hates something. He hates the doctrine of the Nicolaitans. It means to subdue the laity by creating all these layers. Christianity tells Christians they can't understand the Bible in much the same way they did during the Catholic era. We have all the tools now where we never had the tools before. But we're still told that only the elite can understand the Bible. And if we choose for ourselves leaders, choose to ourselves churches to follow, I have people I respect in my life I can go through for advice and believe they have wisdom, but they're not my leader. We have only one leader, that's the Christ. And that was the message in Matthew 23. The idea of canon, a couple of video books on Enoch and Jude talks about how the Hebrews would have had Enoch as a point of reference when discussing things. That would have been part of their text. Now, when it came time to canonize things, they didn't put it in the canon. But that wasn't until much later in the first century when the Bible was written. I didn't take any notes for this. I just want to talk. Yeah, I still can't get that right. The problem is that we're drinking coffee and claiming it to be water. We look at Christianity in its brown color, filtered through tradition, and have literally no care for the meaning of the authors. We take their words and argue back and forth about this doctrine or that, but never ask what would they have meant when they wrote it, not what it means now. Look at, okay, you have this concept. Is this concept that was prevalent in Jewish culture? Is this a concept they would have understood? And if they're presenting something new, does it come from Jesus, the Messiah? Are you allowed to compare and contrast these ideas? When I tend to examine things, I tend to spend most of my time examining the Old Testament. And the reason for that is is that the American church is so New Testament focused that that's where I see things to discover. In the New Testament, I see coffee. I don't see water. So when we examine concepts of the Christian church, we need to ask ourselves, is this a concept that they would have had at the time? If not, where would they have gotten this concept that we claim came from them? Otherwise, we're too addicted to coffee and hate the water. The funny thing is, when I do these videos, I go into thinking, hey, this is going to be a long video or this is going to be a short video. Whichever one it is, it tends to be the opposite. I expected this to be a lot longer, and it's going to be a lot shorter. I think we need to rediscover our faith. And the first step to doing that is to be honest with it. We have to throw out the coffee and reach for the water. And realize, here's something. Let's talk about this. The building blocks that we hold so dear, that we think is a basis of our faith, we can't stand to lose them. But the first century Christians didn't have those. And was their faith not pure? If we say what we understand about canon is inaccurate, and we don't have a sure, thing that we can just believe on faith that this is what's good and this is what's bad, the disciples didn't have that. The apostles didn't have that. The first century church would have had things like the Didache. In some cases, that may have been all they had till Paul's letters had circulated. Different perspective. The first century perspective is uncomfortable. But we've gotten so comfortable with the coffee is that anybody that touches the water is anathema. The doctrines of faith are so rigidly defined. The ins and outs group. I don't believe that the American Christian church faith looks anything like the faith of the first century church. We have set up above ourselves many bishops, many fathers, many mediators, when we're supposed to only need one. We have one comforter and one mediator. And have we become so weaned on the addictive nature of tradition that violence would be the only answer to somebody who countered it? So, like and subscribe. Thank you guys for listening.